Hi everyone, thank you for attending this talk. My name is Shay Moradi and I am from a company called Running in the Halls. Weird name, but that's the name we came up with a couple of years ago. The kind of topic of this talk is Librarygame, but I thought I'd give you a bit of a background basically about how we came to be as a company and how the sort of idea formed and how it's led to the developments that we have now. So, don't know if anyone knows anything about Librarygame already. Anyone here from the library? Great stuff. Cool. So, this is the outline of my presentation. I used to be a lecturer in digital media at the University of Huddersfield. Did that for 4 years, and prior to that I was a student in the come on in, it's fine, we just started. For the past 5 years, though, I have been working Running in the Halls, where I'm the creative director and I'm basically a co-founder. Librarygame, as you'll see, is the product that we also develop at Running in the Halls. We're a very, very small team. There's actually just 3 of us. There's me, there's Alison, Sam, and we had Jake and Gary working for us as well for a short while. Between us, we've actually managed to work for a great number of brands, and as you can see, there's quite a few universities in there as well through our work with Librarygame and other apps that we've done for academia. The gamut of work that we do kind of spreads designing apps, creating interactive websites, making games, but the kind of interesting kind of side of something we got involved with was doing some work for TV clients. Funnily enough, it was through a connection in Coventry where we got our first sort of TV break. There's a company in Coventry called Small Fry. They're a product design agency, and they were good friends of ours, and we kind of collaborated together on one episode for the Gadget Show, and then we just got roped into doing more things for them. So everyone thinks there's a mystery to sort of getting involved, but it's just who you know and whether you're capable of delivering time and time again. And we've done some things on a fairly large scale as well. These are what I would call experiences that try to be social in some kind of way. They are very gameful. They have at their core some kind of entertainment that can be very easily understood and sort of replicated as well. So we have gone to the same site again to do other things. This is a gigantic game of Pac-Man that we developed, essentially making it the world's largest projection mapped game, which got us a Guinness World Record as well. And that was on London's Docklands, projected across the Thames. So we created the game in such a way that it could be mapped onto the features of the building. And the previous one for Stephen Fry's Gadget Man show was a game of battleships that we kind of adapted, similar to the game of battleships, I should say, where you had 2 teams of players and they were using their own mobile phones to connect up to the game and play against one another to destroy part of the building to reveal its underlying circuitry. And also, I guess through our connections there, we kind of get our hands on either technology or games that are kind of not necessarily in the public eye initially, and we get to do interesting things with them. So Battlefield 3, just before it came out, we were responsible for coming up with an interesting installation where you got shot at and you were playing the game in a very sort of immersive way. This sort of base of it here is from a company who makes 360 treadmills effectively, so you can walk and run in any sort of direction and kind of bring you back into the center position. So that was something that got a lot of YouTube views, and it was the first sort of experiment for the Gadget Show as well to put one of their episodes on YouTube. And we've kind of hacked lots of technologies to make existing things in a more sort of cost-effective or a more DIY fashion as well. So we created our own eye tracking software that we then worked with the company in Birmingham. They sort of created a dart sort of propulsion system. So we created an eye-tracked game of darts effectively. So you looked at where you wanted your dart to go and it would sort of fire the dart directly. And we've done data visualizations and things that kind of look pretty on screen, but they also have this kind of underlying kind of either meaning or relationship with some data. This is for the University of Hull, where a tree sort of forms over the course of the day in response to the library visitor activity. And we've done like really large scale interactive games as well. This is a bespoke game that we did for Ford for the Detroit Motor Show earlier this year. And you know, the idea was to kind of interface with these wobble boards and create a multiplayer game that could be played by anyone, picked up really quickly, and be fun as well at the same time. So that was all the kind of work that we did in close to a month. So it's, you know, some of the kind of work that we take on is absolutely insane in terms of its kind of condensed production fashion, but we're constantly relied on for doing things like that. And despite the fact that we use a lot of different technologies, I wouldn't say that we're very technology centric in our approach. We mostly sort of look at it from an experiential angle. Why is someone using this? What are we trying to convey? What kind of factors make the experience more human, less mechanistic almost? And you know, how can we inject interactivity into every facet of that experience to make it memorable and engaging? And I think the best way for us to kind of do this in the library world has been to actually engage librarians, students, staff in very sort of active workshops where we try to gauge their sort of responses in relation to a set number of scenarios, where we try to kind of help them vision their interactions within a library setting in a different kind of way. It's generally having conversations so that we can find the design factors that we can affect and help them achieve some kind of change by giving them certain flavors of software. So for a company that mainly does design on a kind of a service, on a business-to-business client relationship level, to transition into a product development role is it's quite a tricky endeavor, and very few companies actually manage to do so successfully. But I think the kind of approach that we've had is to have co-creators and involve our partners in the development process as much as possible. So a lot of the kind of obsessions and the complexities of developing something become a lot more sort of open, accessible, transparent, and accessible and easier to manage. A lot of my interest in libraries kind of stemmed from early exploration that I did when I was a student, an undergraduate student at the University of Huddersfield. I, you know, basically went from a student didn't have enough UCAS grades to get into that particular course, to really wanting to be on the course, going through clearing, and then ending up with a first-class degree. I spent most of my time in the library, and I think that kind of attributed to my success as a student. I always had that connection there, and therefore when I came to do my master's, I decided to focus on the library as a central focus of what I do. But one of the things that I was noticing in my many hours spent in the library is how people find stuff. You know, I found the interface to the library to be incredibly clunky. It wasn't a very kind of straightforward, intuitive process. You know, everything was geared towards storing things in a certain kind of way, navigating to find things in a certain way. And you know, some of the anecdotal stuff was just seeing somebody with a feature phone back then, writing on a scrap of paper on an envelope, students coming in together to help another student find something in the library, or just oversized books being placed on like one shelf for health and safety reasons. And also found some really interesting things as well. This was in my sort of public library in Huddersfield. They had this, and they still do have this serendipity feature, which I'm sure you've seen in many library presentations. People love to show little quirky things like this. But this is in my local library, and couldn't actually find who'd had the sort of idea to do this. Someone had just decided, look, we'll try and sort of arrange all the novels by their cover colour, because it's a very interesting interface, and it just somehow stuck there, and they keep returning and putting things back in that sort of order. So it just provides a very interesting way to pick a book, you know, judging it literally by its cover. My capabilities were fairly limited, but back then I tried to program prototypes to show how certain things I considered as being smart or more clever and optimal ways of doing things could be right in your pocket. And the smartest thing that you could find, the technology that you could find, was the Pocket PC. That's the smallest, most miniaturized form of a computer that you could put in your pocket. And I thought, you know, having a shelf browser would be quite interesting. So similar to the OS X dock bar, I had like a little shelf browser as you rolled over with your stylus. You could see the book covers, and I experimented with RFID tags were just being introduced into Huddersfield Library. So I experimented with that as well, looking at how potentially you could scan the RFID of one book and see all the books on the shelf in a very sort of quick fashion, or you could have like a tag for a particular row of books and be able to see all those, or just navigating to find something rather than relying on the Dewey sort of signs to figure it out. You could just receive like a GPS-based coordinate system that's localized to your library. And things like this are being done in libraries, you know, throughout the world, anywhere and anyway, and they were kind of inevitable to be happening. But a lot of things weren't happening, and I was kind of frustrated with that. One of the things that frustrated me particularly was that I found the process of coming up with my kind of bibliography fairly disjointed, and, you know, I was finding loads of resources, and I really wanted to keep track of all of these things. And the library was keeping track of what I was borrowing, but there was no connection there between that system and EndNote, for example. And I found that to be a missed opportunity. So I was also interested in, again, I think I was a bit of a lazy student. I was interested in minimizing the amount of typing that I had to do. So I invested in one of those handheld scanners, which are useless, by the way. Don't get them. But I was interested in seeing how, if that was a very clever way of doing it, if I would scan a segment of text from a book, a paragraph, could I instantly connect that to the book that I just sort of have in front of me, and how would I then show other people what I've just bookmarked effectively? And this idea of a social library that forms around people's quotations, so the quote space formed, and it was around the same time that the bookmark tagging website Delicious came to be as well. So I was thinking about how libraries could be organized in alternative ways. The collection could be curated by students in a virtual library presence, and Windmill just, you know, was my response to that, and that was my MA project. So I kind of shelved it for a while. I got the opportunity to present it to Microsoft Research and managed to speak to one of my all-time heroes, Don Norman, while I was there. A very sort of opportune moment to be very excited and tell him about this project that I've made. And he said, "What's smart about this project?" And, you know, it really made me think. I thought, well, actually, there's nothing that smart about it at all without the people using it, without the kind of way it scales, without measuring how effective it is. There is no sort of smartness to the system, and it really got me thinking. And it even made me shelve it even more. I kind of didn't want to revisit it again for a good while, because I found that accessing the library catalogue, for example, being able to make changes to that is something that, you know, is particularly kind of difficult in any sort of library setting. A lot of the vendors have fairly locked down systems, and we're talking a good few years ago. Now you have APIs that allow you access to various sort of systems, but it was, the bottleneck was mainly the bureaucracy involved in trying to do things like that. I was using something called Grease Monkey back then to affect the pages directly. So in the browser, someone still had to install something on their browser in order to then show up the comments that people had sort of had for those particular books, the quotes that they'd taken. And, it wasn't a very workable system. So fast forward a little bit to 2009. It was my last year of teaching at the University of Huddersfield, and I decided to kind of give a bit of a library theme to my studio sort of project. I thought, well, what the heck, it's my last year here. I can, take my creative code students on another journey that I'm interested in. And it turns out that those students who spent more time in the library ended up doing better, whether they were more sort of adept at using the library or whatever. I wish I'd started that earlier, that process, but did a series of interaction design workshops with them, data visualization, and by that point, I think the library was way more open to sharing data, and I had a better relationship with Dave Patton at the time as well. And he really did help and sort of gave me access to a lot of data that I could sort of provide to my students on library activity. That was all anonymized, but still very interesting to students to see where students are coming from, how long they're spending in the library, that sort of thing. And it was then when I started noticing these sort of patterns emerging in the kind of interactions in the library that were already fairly game-like. So if you consider a game being a structured activity that has a set of rules and goals, and there are processes in there that are interesting, fun, and engaging, and you have feedback on how well you're doing. Those kind of things could also apply to certain facets of library activity as well. So let's just take, for instance, borrowing an item. So you have an intention to borrow something. You have to go out, explore the collection, find it using the catalogue perhaps, ask someone. All this process is actually quite interesting. It's learned behavior. If you were just planted in the middle of the library somewhere and you could stumble across something, but you certainly wouldn't be able to find exactly what you're looking for unless you spend a fair bit of time in there. These are all kind of things that games do really well. And I think that it's very easy to draw some sort of parallels there. So a role-playing game, a library, right and left you can see that there are very definite, even in the terminology that we sometimes use as well. So what if I were to kind of try and do something in that sort of library space, something that's fun and interesting and actually helps learners engage with the library more. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that students, again, in my own research and in other people's research to suggest that students who were spending more time in the library were generally doing better. It helped student retention. And unfortunately, I found that libraries were very receptive to the idea of trying something out, but having the funding to do something at that time when you had this sort of nebulous idea was actually quite tricky. So I couldn't convince my university's funding process effectively to give us any money to do anything at that point in time. So that's when I left and I started my own company. And it took a while to kind of be in a position where we could actually focus on something. And I think right then the idea kind of was morphed and influenced by my discussions with my colleagues. We decided to kind of take a very steady approach to exploring the area first, doing a lot of research, thinking about what kind of interactions we want to influence and why anyone would invest in something like this. How we'd have to convince them that actually this is very useful to have this game that we've devised. And so that process of designing stuff, prototyping things, specifying, it all started, and started attending library conferences, went to ALA, which was a crazy experience in itself. Just saw what a gigantic industry actually it is, and how library systems vendors are they try to kind of play it very safe with their sort of approach to developing and changing the software. And I think due to their long-standing relationships with so many libraries, it's very difficult to move and shift and make any changes. So anything that we make would have to be an augmentation that sits on top or beside the things that they've made. And you know, this is where we're at really. We are now in a position where we've had Lemon Tree, which is a version of Librarygame that I'll be showing you guys, running since 2011 at the University of Huddersfield, and we went with 2 other partners, the University of Manchester and Glasgow, to redefine what that initial prototype was like. And they wanted their own sort of versions as well, booked in and Library Tree. And then the Open University approached us around the same time, but it took a fair while for us to get started in working for them as well. So this is what Librarygame Lemon Tree, the edition that Huddersfield has, looks like. You know, instantly you can see it's a more sort of friendly, visually engaging interface to a library system. So you have the book covers. Granted, these are pretty book covers that we've chosen for this particular demo. But you know, the idea of having a profile for a reader or for someone who's using the library and allowing their activity to be visualized and shared in a very kind of open capacity was quite an alien concept in the land of libraries, especially public libraries, who we initially approached, in fact. And you know, the notion of privacy being quite sacred in what you sort of use, what you do in the library and what you borrow and how much control you have to give to the user was something that was constantly highlighted, and especially so in America as well, where you know, people will just openly tell you, nah, this isn't going to work. You know, no one would be interested in this. And I was just thinking, actually, you know, people using Goodreads and all these other services, you clearly haven't been sort of looking around. You know, we aren't the first to kind of bring anything like this, but we were certainly the first to try and integrate it directly with the library. And I think that's where the difference and the special sort of source lies, in that we have a very direct connection with the library system. So no one has to enter these. There are no chores involved in entering the kind of details of what you've borrowed or what your activity is. You know, it's all, in some ways, it's actually passive. It happens in the background, but you are prompted to do things as you use the system. So this idea, we're going back to the idea of quoting, of mining the quote space effectively. So someone takes out a book, they enrich the library catalogue with their review, and then you're sort of suddenly browsing a book based on its popularity, on how many times it's been taken out, you know, what people are saying about a book, and you know, you sort of start to build up a recommendation that's very social, and you know, you start to see faces cropping up next to popular books as well. So this is Manchester's sort of version. Let me just go to the live sort of demo here. So this is the system as it stands. So this person has 57 friends, and a live ticker of their activity sort of takes place here. And that's what's going on. I mean, this is a simulated demo. I usually use this to show how the system works, but if you go to log into Manchester's system, you'll be able to see the user sort of activity in the same sort of fashion. And I'm going to go on to sort of describing some of the features as well that it has. So you've got leaderboards, you have an at-a-glance view of how the library is being used, and there's this sort of sense of competition building, that you're working towards something, which is, again, you know, for a largely solitary experience, it's adding some flavour to it that kind of didn't exist before. You're seeing sort of progression on a short-term level and a long-term level. So, for example, how often you go to the library, visit it, how many books you check out affect your the hotness of your card. So your library card gets hot to the point that it's on fire, or gets really cold if it's neglected. And in lemon tree's case, there are 8 steps to growing your perfect lemon tree. The goal is to make sure that you have fruit on your lemon tree, and in the middle you might have bugs that sort of infest it, and there are various sort of activities that can affect your lemon tree, and various customizations as well. We also, with Glasgow and Manchester, we thought, well, one of our goals is to see students engaging with the collection on a kind of a very granular level, and being able to influence it would be quite an interesting academic vessel or tool as well. So if you borrow quite widely from one particular area, you might get an achievement for that particular subject area. If you borrow widely from 2 different areas, you might be able to combine those and get a particular achievement. So these are the types of badges that you receive for your interactions, for the time-based interactions when you sort of come to the library. So you might get the night owl if you're comes to the library period late, or the let's have lunch achievement if you come in mainly during the lunch times. They might be quite frivolous things, but people actually pay attention to these things. And it was really interesting to see quite recently for us that a lot of our assumptions could be very easily challenged with a simple sort of survey. When you start to kind of survey users who've been using it for a couple of months, you get a very good picture of what they're actually after. And I could not have predicted that it would be structured in such a way. So this is Kay Monroe sort of compiled the stats for the University of Glasgow. She is the librarian there who's been sort of working with us quite closely, and she's actually done a presentation with Kieran Talbot. If you're interested in their experiences with us, there's I can send you the link to the presentation they've done as well. Quite eye-opening. Students are actually interested in gaining points. What they want to use those points for, I don't know, but just the aspect of personal analytics is genuinely very important to a lot of people. They want to be acknowledged for the fact that they're using the library more, whether that's competing with their other friends, which is quite low on the list, or just against themselves. They just want to know that I've really put in time to use the library, and they want to see some kind of effects of that. And some of the features that we'd spent a lot of our time on, more than 8% of our time, 8% we're interested in reviewing and recommending things. But I think it's the long term that we can start to see the real sort of patterns emerge, and the real sort of benefits of such a system. For us, it's mainly been an opportunity to implement a system that hasn't existed before in an environment that's been quite receptive to it now, and seeing how students want to shape it through their use of the system. So if they start neglecting it, then we'll know that there's something that needs to be adjusted. We'll get feedback from them, but if they start using certain features more than others, then that's our instant feedback to realize that actually maybe we can work on this a bit more and make it more polished, and maybe we can add these features. So it's very kind of usage led. We're not sort of creating any features on a whim. And ultimately we're really trying to get students to study better and smarter. So the things that really sort of strike out as being important to me are providing some kind of utility to users. So the bits that we're developing now go back to the idea of do students need help compiling their bibliography? Can we provide them with that? Yes. Can we provide them with a better interface to search books in their subject area, to find their friends who are also looking at similar books? And these have all come from past bits of feedback that we've had from Huddersfield, Glasgow and Manchester. And how do we start to measure some of these factors in the development of the system? What kind of targets are we trying to go for? These are all kind of extremely important, I feel. And how do we help users better curate experiences for other users as well. So can they set their own challenges for other users, and how do we kind of help look at the collection in alternative ways? So these are our challenges, I guess, sort of moving forward. And I'd be very interested in seeing if there are some consequences that we never thought of in relation to people find, for example, ways of using a system that you never imagined they'd use it for. And I think the easiest way to kind of do that for us is to observe very closely what people are doing with the system and keep things as simple as possible. If you overcomplicate or overdefine something, then you're narrowing the scope of possibility. The more open to interpretation something is, and the more capable it is in allowing people to use it in their own way, the more likely that we do get some interesting unintended change and consequences. Thanks very much.
Two questions. The first one is, have you or the university carried out any evaluation in terms of the quality of learning or the outcomes of learning that has been supported by the system?
The straightforward answer to that is no. There have been lots of evaluations throughout the sort of initial sort of pre-proposal stage where you're trying to figure out whether the library needs something like this. So we do our own surveys. I guess the libraries sort of look at that as a business proposition, and they have to evaluate things based on what they hear from other libraries as well. So there's that sort of side of evaluation that does take place. But in terms of how it sort of impacts learning, I guess that's a more sort of longitudinal study in seeing how a system has affected one or a certain number of students' experience throughout the course of a number of years, or if there are very direct sort of attributable qualities that have affected the experience of using the library, and if that's impacted learning. But it's the same question as asking, so the Library Impact Data project, for example, looked at how student attainment could be sort of measured in terms of their use of the library, if there was a correlation between more use of the library or less use of the library and what grade students end up with. Where we fit into that part of the equation is, how have we affected the library experience? Have we actually marketed the library better to promote its use amongst undergrad students, for example, who perhaps don't use the library as much as their sort of third and fourth year counterparts? So if we can affect those sort of factors, then perhaps we have a say in how a student's learning has been shaped. But when it comes to how the Open University, for example, is doing things, because a lot of their interactions basically take place online, their approach to it was very kind of, what kind of features does Librarygame have, or what features will it have in the long run that will enable certain challenges to be set to students? How does the digital information literacy program get delivered through Librarygame, for example? And that's very directly affecting students' learning experience, and you could very actively measure that, for example, and say that these students who completed the digital information literacy component of the Skills Passport, they managed to kind of score better in their degree as well, because they were using more resources, and these things are all measurable, but we haven't done any of those kind of things yet. So the first step really is to have your system in place first, and then try and affect it using those kind of measures and metrics, really. So I'm personally very interested in seeing how it will affect learning. But I think in the first stage, you have to kind of approach the libraries first and be there first.
And my second question, have you thought about the ever-changing sort of, the way users would use a space, because the use of a library has changed a lot compared to like 20, 30 years. For example, most of the students would actually use the library not because of the books, but because of the spaces that we provide for teamwork and for quiet study and things like that. So possibly these are the things that we would like to see supported, perhaps?
Well, I think librarians are kind of massively switched on to the fact that certainly in the academic sort of library world, not necessarily in the public library though, you know, there are lots of voices and, you know, I'm generalizing massively. I think they're very switched on to the notion that the library is a kind of a part of the kind of academic experience is crucial and pivotal to a student's success, and therefore you can't just cling on to this sort of notion that, you know, you're a collection of items and, you know, you have expertise locked into the building. It's, you know, providing ample space for exploration, providing space for students to, you know, the common spaces that you have are kind of geared towards a different form of experience than the one that existed many years ago. I remember when my dad was doing his PhD and I'd spend some time with him in the library. It was a very formal, you know, he was studying law, but, you know, just always felt extremely formal. You know, now libraries, when you go into them, they're extremely informal. The kind of atmosphere is completely and utterly changed. And I think for us, because we're kind of primarily dealing with an online product, a product that users find on their most frequented channels, I think the challenge for us is how do we get onto those channels? And just to give you a little, for instance, initially when we started, we thought that our integration with Facebook was going to be quite important. And we realized that we were getting a lot of hits from the kind of feed that was being published to. So for key milestone achievements, students would receive like a badge that would get published to their wall. And that was a nice little effect that where we saw, okay, we're getting a lot of hits from people's wall activity. Suddenly Facebook changes their feed algorithm, so you don't show up as much. So by relying on, you know, the ground is ever changing, it's even more difficult in the online sort of space, I feel. With physical spaces, you go through phases and it takes years before change sort of happens, whereas in the online space, it's on a kind of a daily basis. So I think naturally we do have to be very sort of attuned and very sort of attentive to that. But like I say, there's only so much a small team can do as well. So that's why we look to our sort of partners, and we've created the platform, especially OpenTree, so open to allow the universities to sort of feed into how the system works and interoperates with their agenda as well. And you know, it's obviously very nice that the sort of existing university partners are all kind of quite open to the idea of benefiting from each other's activities. Again, something you don't find in the commercial world necessarily, where competing businesses would effectively share things as openly as they do. But in the library world, it's really lovely actually. You know, libraries don't have that kind of territorialness about it, and they love to share. So we're in a very fortunate position there.
I'm from the library, so I've got an interest, and I'm fascinated by your perception that library management systems have told you that libraries are slow to respond, whereas we would probably suggest that were the other way around.
It's no, to clarify, it is the library vendors who are very slow to respond.
Oh, yeah, right.
This is our completely. Just want to clarify if I miss. No, they're slow because the number of libraries they deal with, and I don't really have any sort of we have lots of friends in various sort of companies who are involved in kind of creating library software, but I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying that, because I have noticed that they're kind of catering for a very broad sort of market very often, especially in the public library sector, and you don't just sort of roll out changes as easily as Google does with thousands of programs, because they've actually got very small teams as well that deal with their software. Sometimes they outsource their sort of development as well. So it's just for me it was very interesting seeing those business models and how prolific some of them can be and how stratified it is as well. Actually, there's so many different solution providers out there, but very few who are trying out new things and in order for them to kind of survive, I feel like they do have to kind of make more attractive interfaces, and enrichment should be a key part.
At Huddersfield, the project that you developed, so it gave students sort of points for using the library.
Yes.
And that was quite successful. Then there was recommendations to other students, and that was about 8%. What else did the game do?
So there are a couple of sort of features. You know, you are collecting points for your own usage within the library.
Yeah.
So everything that you do has some kind of attribution.
That bit, but what
You
else?
get achievements and badges for
Yeah.
completing certain actions, so using the library in a certain kind of way. So that's pretty self-explanatory as well with those sort of badges. You can recommend an item to another user.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you go to,
Yeah, you
you
can
can
do
just
that
have a
on
look at,
sort of our library.
you can highlight something. You can. This is the OpenTree sort of edition, which shows your e-resources as well. So as you're accessing an e-resource, it highlights that e-resource, and you can add an annotation to it. You can.
Yeah, we can do that with
Yeah.
our library management system, and the students didn't engage, so I'd be interested to know how
Or-
you marketed it differently.
Yeah.
But what percentage of students sort of took part, used the game at Huddersfield?
So at Huddersfield,
Did you manage to engage the students? That's an issue we have.
no, I don't think it was a massive engagement. You know, there was a lot of marketing sort of involved in the sort of getting the first prototype to effectively be used by. You know, there's always an air of skepticism when you first sort of launch
Yeah.
something. So it took a fair while for us to get 500 users, but I think now it's sort of around 3,500 or so users, and it's a fair while. But the users who have been using it very actively, and then they've, you know, over the course of the sort of 2 or 3 years that they've been in touch with us, they've been kind of partly responsible for suggesting things to us that we've implemented for Glasgow and Manchester. And so next year we're moving everyone onto the version that we've developed for the Open University, and they've all agreed to this. So I guess in a way they're kind of benefiting from this iterative process of developing it. But yeah, they were very slow to sort of begin with, whereas Manchester and Glasgow, they achieved around 2,000 users much quicker. So both of them did that in six months or so. I don't want to be quoted on this, but right now,
it's an issue for us.
yeah, but every year you would get an influx of new users. The important thing for me is how long users are spending on the site on average. So those numbers are actually very encouraging. So students are spending 2 to 3 minutes on the site, and that is, to me, is, you know, you've got Facebook, and then you've got potentially other sort of social sites, and on the periphery of those, if you can get to that position where someone's spending more than a minute on your site, you're actually doing okay. So I'm really encouraged by that, and looking at where they're looking as well. So you can see a heat map of, you know, I think we need to work better on showing some of the results of our, but you know, we've constantly been in the process of making stuff and proposing things. So evaluating is the fun sort of part of, you know, figuring out whether some of those things have
We have a virtual
worked.
shelf on our, so you can see the books lined up as you'd suggest, and you know, you can export to RefWorks and things like that. I'm interested. Perhaps it is. I'm trying to think of an idea, you know, that we could do. You know, maybe the thing that is different from what we've got already is that users can see what other users are doing. You know, so and so's just logged onto an e-resource.
Yeah, I think.
And there is a, you know, with the data protection thing, sort of this sort of.
So it's always very opt-in for users. So we're not sort of.
But that's maybe something.
The whole thing is opt-in. So students have to abide by the, you know, regulations of the university systems. However, their sort of their kind of individual privacy settings are set by the student, not by us. The link is made by the student, so they have to link their library card to the system, not the other way around. We don't automatically subscribe people onto it. And they can remain anonymous, so all of their kind of stuff remains there. We don't have any of this data. This data is on the university servers, and there are very sort of strict access controls for us as well. So, you know, really it's a process of co-creating with the students directly to, with the universities directly to kind of achieve the results that we have done. But one thing that is perhaps missing is this sense of progression, that you're building towards something. So in the gameful state, what we've actually done is that each sort of version of Librarygame, whether it's Manchester, Glasgow, Huddersfield, or the Open University, they have a tree or a plant or something that they're growing, and you know, set collection is a huge draw. You know, people want a set of something. You know, Pokemon, you know, Care Bears or whatever. You know, if it's something is collectible, then people will want to sort of achieve the full set status, and that will encourage some people to use the library in a slightly different way than they did before. So whether it's e-resources or anything else that they access, hopefully it'll lead to more sort of proficient use by seeing what other students are doing as well.
Great questions and a fantastic presentation, though. Thank you very much.
Welcome, thank you. Cheers.